Good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's on the session today. First of all, thank you all for your time. My name is Anupam Dasgupta. I work as VP Marketing with Quintype, which is a SaaS product company offers a SaaS suite of products for digital publishers. I have the privilege of being in conversation today with Mr. Antoine Nazaret, who is the VP APAC business for Dailymotion, which as we all know, is one of the global leaders in terms of a video sharing platform. I quickly, firstly request Antoine to, navigate us through the rest of the colleagues he has today and speak a little bit more about Dailymotion before we go further. Over to Antoine.
Sure, Anupam. Thanks for having us, by the way. It's a great pleasure and an honor to be with you today. It's really cool. I want to quickly introduce Dembi, who is our head of marketing for APAC. She's based in Korea, as well as JB, who is a head of product based in Australia. Both like critical and beautiful team members of Dailymotion in the region and over, not only in APAC actually. So a few words about Dailymotion. We started a long time ago, like I think 17 years ago. I think we just celebrated our 17th anniversary as a video platform. And it started, as you might remember, as a very UGC platform, such as what YouTube was at that time. And along the way, we turned ourselves in direction of media, premium content, high quality content, and we became one of the largest, let's call it that way, OTT premium ecosystem, with today a little bit below 400 million monthly active users, essentially all of them being media partners. And what we do provide to them is obviously an audience on the Dailymotion platform, the Dailymotion app, as well as a technical solution or a video solution, something that we might talk a little bit more later. The headquarters is in Paris. It's a French company owned by a large media conglomerate named Vivendi, which is probably the largest European media conglomerate that you can think about. So that's a short introduction about us.
Hey, thanks, Antoine. Wonderful to have all of you here. Now, quickly on to the topic for the day. So we're going to talk about video content, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? So of course, we all know the good of it very intuitively, right? So we know how important video content is for digital publishers, even otherwise, right? We know about the Instagrams, the Snapchat, chat, the TikTok, Dailymotions and YouTubes, etc., where you see so much of engagement with videos. Right now, having said that, is it all green and is it all rosy or not? Is the discussion which we are going to get into today. So the bads and the uglies besides the good. So Antoine, right? So the first reference goes back to 2015, 2016 with the pivot to video kind of thing, when the expectation would have been that video would have a clean sweep and you would kind of displace text in a much more compelling manner than it actually has. So wanted to quickly invite you to share your thoughts on that, being in the zone itself in terms of with Dailymotion, and who better than you to kind of share your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Thanks for that. It's obviously a really critical question to start with, because we've been in that ecosystem for pretty much like 2 decades almost. What we have observed is, like, for a lot of media and companies, the challenge with digital was already big enough. And then came an additional one, which is suddenly there's this trend of like everything will be video, like text will become irrelevant. Obviously, it's not the case, right? But I think the mood and the atmosphere was like that. And you imagine that for a news publisher or for a publisher of media, it's already very challenging to move from digital to mobile to then video. It's a very different ballgame, very challenging. And it was coming from different external sources, I would say. It was not like the media industry saying, oh, we should shift everything to video. It was more like an ecosystem or some external and exogenous factors that were going the same direction. One was brands and advertisers were really excited to like spend on video, essentially. Another one was Facebook actually was really pushing into let's go to video, more and more videos. And in the back of our mind was also the beautiful success of YouTube, which was going into the billions everywhere. It was growing superbly fast. And you had a sort of drug addiction because the numbers were big. It was millions and millions and millions of views everywhere. It was growing fast. So it was very exciting for everyone. And on top of that, you have a lot of scholars, pundits, researchers, journalists, writers who would refer to the Cisco analysis that says, like, in 2022, 80% of the data consume on mobile will be video, right? So that was the background. And that was a pretty nice noise actually all around media that you should go to video. Obviously, it's not that simple, but I think that was a driving force behind like everyone going kind of crazy about like, let's go into video 100%. And it was challenging, and it is still challenging these days.
Sure, sure. So, which also brings through the pieces of, how do you actually do your video content strategy, right? If you compare it with, let's say, TV content, which is probably much more in volume. So how do you actually plan your video content? Does it become more niche? How do you actually play the game? It certainly isn't a volume game, isn't it?
No, it's a great point. And it was very difficult from the get-go for all the media and publishers that are not part of the TV ecosystem. By the way, the TV ecosystem as a business is still very relevant. It's a huge business still. There are a lot of people who watching and buying commercial on TV. So it's not at all a dead business at all. It's the opposite. I might share later in the chat a few references, and one article about that is really clear that actually the shift to digital advertisement came against, I would say, news publisher more than TV. If you look at the way the market was sharing advertisement spent in dollars, it's very interesting to look at that. So TV is a very organized business. There's a lot of formats. We've been watching TVs for decades and decades and decades. So our mindset is, and the way we look at content goes with a certain expectation that comes from the TV business. That includes the length of the video. And because of all this advertising cut that we have in a program, like we tend to build videos in 1 minute, in 2 minutes, this kind of segment. So that was all about the TV experience, the TV type of content. And obviously for a non-TV type of media, it's very, very difficult to reproduce that at scale, or not even at scale, because it's a huge cost. I started as a journalist in a TV organization. It's a massive investment. A studio is a huge piece of money behind it, and also knowledge. So it's very difficult to reproduce that. So I think the first challenge for a lot of us in the industry was to really understand that we should not try to just reproduce TV, because TV is its own media. And if we just reproduce that on other ecosystem, that might just not work. It makes no sense to anticipate that the same type and same format and same duration of content will be as relevant on, let's say, mobile that it is on TV. You don't consume content on mobile the same way that you watch TV, obviously. The other element that was super important was to understand that a lot of that trend, a lot of that dynamic was on platforms that are not your own platform. And I can tell that with a lot of freedom, because we are part of that. We're a platform by ourselves, and we have our own rules. And all of these platforms, being Dailymotion, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, whatever, they apply their own rules in the sense that they drive the game. They dictate the terms in which you're distributing your content on this platform. A good example is the way they will rank a video, the way they will handle discoverability of a video, the way they will handle how people engage with a video, what sort of content will be promoted, etc., etc. It's our own rules, and we play with our own rules. So you had to understand as a media, as a publisher, that you will actually bring content on these platforms, but you don't really control the ecosystem that much. You can't really say, I don't want my content to be seated nearby my direct competitor, or all these kind of things. It's not under your control. So you also have to understand that. With that comes also the fact that these rules, to be honest, they keep changing. Like pretty much not every day, but every week you will see a new thing in the business, in the news industry that will tell you, oh, Instagram is back to the chronological feed. Oh, TikTok is getting longer, YouTube is getting shorter, like every day, not every day, every week. So all these rules are very complex to navigate. And so as a media, as a publisher, you have to be like pretty agile, like A/B testing a lot of that. But obviously at the end of the day, you need to be where is the audience. So you have to go there. I think it's mandatory, but you also have to recognize that, well, these platforms, they are run for their own interest. That's normal. And not always it will align with your own interest. Just as an example, that explains why, I think there's several studies that shows that, but for the first 10 years of YouTube, all the major top channels in terms of audience and subscribers were like what we can call YouTubers, or PGC, which essentially means content creators that are native to YouTube, because they better understand the rules and the way it works and the formats and everything. Later on, other industries have been able to catch up. A good example is the music industry. And probably these days, Universal Music, T-Series in India, etc., are the leading force in terms of audience on, let's say, a YouTube or other platform. But it takes a lot of time for them to adjust, better understand the formats, and being in that agile mode that will allow you to try, iterate, fail, and find the right solution again. So these were very difficult challenges. And if I just can mention one more, finding the right format was super tough for a lot of the media and publishers that we've been able to work with, because again, the reference was TV. And there's a little story that I just want to share, because so previous to be in APAC, I was in Europe, and I was working with a very big newspaper. The kind of newspaper that carry, that sort of brand gravitas. So when you talk about them, it's like the big reference. I don't know what it will be in India, maybe the Hindu at some point because of the quality of the English language, something like that. So for us, in Europe, we had several of them, and I was working at Dailymotion with one of them. Great newspaper, #1 in the ranking in different countries for a lot of good reason. Beautiful journalism, and it's an institution, right? But they were struggling with video. They were very, very much struggling with what is the right format and so on. And they had a team of younger people than the rest of the group that was trying to iterate in terms of videos. And eventually, I don't know how they convinced their management to try something different. So what they did is that following format. I'm still amazed by how they managed to crack it. So what they did is a cartoon of a 2-minute video in a cartoon format that was trying to explain the tax system in France, which by the way is very complex because French people are very good at taxation. So they were trying to navigate that, design it very nicely. The cartoon was actually explaining your tax level by virtue of using potatoes and different drawing. It was super, super nice. And that was one of their most successful videos. But if you think about it, the format was really far from what was the newspaper in terms of brand gravitas, but they managed to find the right tone of voice, the right format, the right duration, and they cracked it. And then they continued on that format, which is let's draw and turn into cartoon, which actually cartoon is not that far from newspaper if you think about it. That's always been there associated with newspaper. They slightly tweak it. And they continued that format. And the aim was let's take a very boring, dry, complex topic. Let's make it nicely with a cartoon approach to explain it in a very accessible fashion. And so they managed to try to crack that format, which was at that time nowhere on TV, right? So that's I think a good example.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, interesting insights. I mean, as I expected, these nuggets from your experience are very interesting. So you made quite a few points there, which also takes my mind towards the fact that how do you actually strategize your video content on your website versus channels across, right? So what is going to be your strategy? Do you prioritize on one versus the other, or it's an equal priority, or what is your criteria? What kind of audience are you targeting? What is your take on that?
It's a great question, but it's a very difficult one, honestly. And what we can share here, because we have to be honest, is what we've learned by working with all these publishers across many, many different regions along the years. It's difficult because on one hand, you have, I think, a long-term movement into media, journalism, and publisher in general towards fully advertising-based model to subscribers. I think that's a long-term movement that is very healthy in a way. So these are your core users, the one that you care the most about. But then you also have the need to grow that base and to have a new target addressable market that you want to go after. And anyway, you need to be where is the audience. And often this audience is on external platforms that you don't own and control, as we said at the top of the conversation, being a TikTok, I'm sorry, not in India, but being a YouTube, a Facebook, and Instagram, and many, many other platforms that will come or that are already there or that are niche or not so niche. So you have to consider all of that ecosystem. And the very simple way to look at it is you have your core users that you need to serve the best, and you have new addressable, let's call it users, clients, subscriber, whatever the terms, that you need to engage. But it's very different because your core users, they know your brand, they know what to expect from you. Likely, they also know your political opinion or positioning. If there are some, they know what you stand for, they know your value, they know who you are, etc., etc. The new target audience that you're trying to reach out on these other platforms, the discoverability process is completely random. you don't control it. They might end up in front of your video. They have never heard about you. So you really have to address the message to them slightly differently. Let's say, I'll take my example, which is a bad example, but I've been reading the New York Times for the past, let's say, 6 years. I don't need any introduction about what is the stance of the New York Times, but I will discover a video on YouTube from another publisher in the US. I don't know what the LA Times stands for, or I don't know, even others, right? It's a very different user journey that you need to take in consideration and that you need to strategize. Adding to that, the formats, because obviously, if you're trying to do that, by the way, I didn't mention, but the Washington Post did great stuff on TikTok, but obviously the formats are very, very specific to TikTok. So you also have to adjust and adapt these formats to this ecosystem of platforms. And these formats are changing. So I think one is really, I need to serve my core base, and that's my priority number one. I think it's really priority number one because they are here for you. You have a direct relationship with them. They came on your platform, being your application, your web mobile website, whatever, for a reason. And you should serve them the best way possible. You should know what are their expectations, what kind of things they want to see in video. You can run survey and customer journey analysis with them. The other one is for me more a marketing tool to try to grow your audience and to have a presence on these brands. But obviously, as a platform, that's the same for us, Dailymotion. Your role is not to drive traffic outside of your platform. Your role, your KPIs, your data tells you, I want to have my users stick on my platform. That's what I aim to maximize the time spent on my platform. So these are really there's a contradiction here, obviously. I think if I have to choose as a media, as a publisher, what I observe over the past 15 years, like you should prioritize your own core of audience because you have a direct connection with them.
Yeah. Yeah. No, fair enough. I mean, that really makes a lot of sense, that it's actually, strictly speaking, it's not one versus the other. It's a mix of both.
You're right. Maybe just one point came to my mind. Like there's also a big trend, which is interesting, which is the rise of newsletter. I think that's something that indicates that because the email is a non-mediated communication between one and another. And you don't really depend on an external platform that will dictate pretty much the terms of the rules or the terms of conditions. And so it's popular because it's great content, very useful, and you have beautiful things that goes into these newsletters, but also because it's a direct connection between you and your users. So that tells you also that I think for most of the media and the publishers, they realize that I need that direct connection. I think the next generation in terms of that mindset are brands. Because if you look at it, most of the brands that we consume on, I don't know, here in Singapore might be Lazada, might be Flipkart, might be Amazon, but they're actually not direct to you. You barely buy something dedicated, like directly on the brand website. You often go through someone else. And so that's probably the next movement that we'll see.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, which slightly tangential, but which also brings us to the point of data-driven personalization, right? Even if they're not on your website, you might actually serve them something which is very personalized to their interest, right? So, which again brings them back to your website, maybe as a new visitor, or makes them more loyal to your core offering. But speaking of the core offering and let's say the videos per se, right? So, how do you make sure that your videos are more and more let's say evergreen per se, right? They have a greater longevity, or you can repurpose or make them into different formats. So what is the secret sauce behind having videos which are which are there for a longer tenure or forever? And how do you see that obviously impact monetization?
It's again, well, first it's a very difficult question because there is no code to crack here. It's like each and every media will have a different, slightly different story that we've been able to understand and observe by virtue of working with all of them, as well as Dailymotion itself as a platform. We probably have 300 million videos on the platform. So we can see there's this very famous book, The Long Tail Effect. So we can see the long tail effect, right? The long tail effect is still like that 60% of the audience is coming from very recent videos that are less than a week. But 40% is coming from catalog, back catalog, archive, whatever the terms you want to utilize. So we were seeing that from our lens, which is Dailymotion as a platform having a huge catalog of videos, as well as the experience with the media. And it's a very difficult ball game, this evergreen piece, because you have to navigate into different with a set of constraints. So first, obviously you have to think about like, okay, I need to find a long-term story versus our news approach, right? There's obvious stuff. An example will be celebrations. So just to take you through a neutral example, you have a Martin Luther King Day every year in the US. So you know that that story will come over and over and over again. And you have religious celebration in India recently and next to come, et cetera, et cetera. So you know that that will be there. There are reference points. Recently, you had Women's Days. I think, when was that? Yeah, I mixed with the date. But anyway, what I remember, I saw that, I think it was on the Quint, actually, a story from the first Indian woman that was a lawyer. I don't remember her name, but it was actually a video from 2-3 years ago. But it's still relevant in the context of, let's say, Women's Day celebration, which probably should be every day. But anyway, that's another problem. But this content is evergreen because that story of the first lawyer being in India, the first female lawyers, makes sense along the years. The other, so that's the content, the story that you want to bring to the audience. But the other thing is you need data and metadata and contextual metadata. Maybe JB, you want to explain later one of the products that we have for that. But because you need filters, you need context, you need to have properly tagged your video in order to retrieve that. And often it still surprised me a lot that a media or a publisher will put a lot of effort into creating the video, uploading the video, putting that video up front in front of the users, but the contextual metadata around it, being the title, the tags, the description, all of that, the date of creation, all of that is pretty weak, which means that after the video is released, you have very few options to recirculate it in a nice way, right? And I just want to give you just one example, which is not in the video field, but I think is relevant, which is more in the podcast industry. And I was mentioning their names. The Washington Post, what they did, it's very basic and simple, but I think it worked well, is that they did a series that called Presidential. So what they just did is 45 episodes by a chronological approach that explain and tell you the story of each and every president. It's pure evergreen content. Turns out that every here and there you have an election in the US, so it became again more relevant and relevant. But the topic itself and the format serve that purpose. So maybe JB, we should mention the contextual product that we have, right?
Yeah. Thanks, Antoine. Yeah, I think we've seen the crossing of two trends. First, Anupam, what you explained, the pivot to video 2015, 16. Now we're 6 years past that, so that means a huge catalog for a lot of publishers. Huge catalog, niche content, non-niche content, but what do you do of those thousands, if not tens of thousands of assets? And the second obvious trend, which we've all been talking about since 2 years, is cookieless world and more reliance on contextual data, right? And so how do you map the two together with a content that you spend effort producing? Now you need to spend effort tagging it. And tagging means many things. You can use many frameworks, right? There's industry frameworks like the AAB framework. And so we've seen a few dozen publishers in APAC specifically, but that's a global trend, that have been leveraging this catalog, whether it's on Dailymotion, on YouTube, on any platform, Vimeo, TikTok, and they're trying to repurpose it and circulate it, and they want to scale it across pages because, as Antoine said, you've got this long tail of content that is being watched. We see content constantly turning new videos, even if they're old from 4 or 5 years ago. They get audience again and again because of the editorial calendar that Antoine described, or because of the same event two different events to the same person happens, and then all of a sudden, if you get a president reelected, then videos from their former election, obviously, they get more. That happened in Malaysia, that happened in other countries as well. So we've seen that trend of people trying to leverage the data from their content to be able to match that with articles and automatically get that content in front of users when the story made the headlines again. Okay, so you've got ways of doing that. Dailymotion has a way to do that, but in general, it's more from a trend from the journalists and the editorial teams. How can we leverage that content that was produced by people that maybe left the company 3 years ago, but their legacy is still there, so you still want to be using it, right? Yeah.
Interesting. On that note of evergreen videos and meta tagging, making them discoverable, how would you respond to, let's say, the key points? So let's say the golden 4 rules, the 5 rules of quality of videos, right? I mean, quality versus quantity is what we are talking about also, right? Briefly, we mentioned about volume earlier. So the depth of the content, etc., basis some of the experiences you've had, of course. How would you advise for, let's say, publishers for one or any business to sustain the quality of videos? What are the few top things they should really follow without fail to kind of make sure that the quality of videos are there? Because that is probably one of the ingredients in becoming evergreen, right? So
yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Quality matters more than anything, but previous to that, you have it's a big question already, but you have a bigger question, which is, what is my video strategy and how it matches with my brand perception as a media? I'll give you a very, very basic example. Your Euronews or ABP or I don't know, like our news TV covering news cycle 24/7, you need volume. And your users are expecting volume. They are probably also expecting live. Your CNN, they're expecting live, etc. So the brand equity versus the video strategy makes sense if you're like dropping a lot of content, high quality likely, but it's essentially the volume and how fresh it is and how relevant it is, how like close to the news it is. Like something's happening in Ukraine, you're sure that in a minute you have, not in a minute, but like in a few minutes you have something there. And that's what you're expecting from them as a brand. Their brand equity is there. You need volume because that's what they stand for. And you know that. But maybe you're the Quint or the Wire or I don't know, another public kind of, or the Ken, which is the other extreme because they publish one story per day, I think. You expect something else. You expect something very different. But I think before even thinking about like the quality or whatever, it's like my video content and my video strategy should make sense with my brand equity because my users are expecting something from me that is coming from a context, an history, a background, etc., etc. So that's the first element. And then you're right. Once you have defined that, probably quality at the end matters so much compared to quantity when you have defined that positioning, because there's a lot of example, and there's recently one of the biggest YouTube, actually is more than, well, he's one of the biggest YouTuber. He has close to, I think he has 96 million followers on YouTube, which is insane. It's fantastic. His name is Mr. Beast. And he was talking to Joe Rogan in the podcast that is exclusive to Spotify. And he essentially said something like 10% more of my time in one videos equal to way more than just 10% more views. Because if I improve the quality, it's exponential. The views goes to the roof. So, and a lot of publishers are sharing that same feedback. The quality, the intention, the way you design these videos is extremely important. Because actually when the users will engage with the videos, they're expecting something from you, and you should be true to that brand equity, to that brand gravitas that you have. So it is, I think, very crucial to be clear about what's your value proposition when you bring videos, because not everything could be covered in videos. There's probably some investigation journalism that doesn't go that well in a video format. Some will be, it depends, but it has to be, I think, a very clear value proposition. I'll give you another example that I absolutely love, because it goes into the opposite experience that we had. Dailymotion is an AVOD platform, so we create business for our partners and publisher by virtue of having ads. But obviously, in other markets, you have media that are only relying on subscribers. And so we work with some of them. So they don't want ads, but we still provide them video solution. Their approach to video was every day, I will have a 25-minute segment at something like 8 p.m. So late in the evening, I will have a 25-minute segment where I will bring one of my journalists, an expert on a topic, and someone else, and it will be a long 25-minute segment. And they started that, I was still in France, so probably 8 years ago. At that time, they even did better or worse. They started with a 1 hour segment per day. And I remember they said it's too heavy, so they cut it short, etc., etc. Just to tell you that it's a paid subscription news business. By the way, they have 140K subscribers, so it's a very profitable business. And they decided that they will treat video as a 26-minute format every day, free. You don't need to subscribe. So that product is purely a marketing product in a way also. It served their core users, as I was mentioning previously, but it's also a marketing product. It's on YouTube, it's on Dailymotion, it's everywhere. But it's 26 minutes, long format. Also to tell you that this idea that the length of the video, like Gen Z, Gen X were in front of a redfish, attention span problem, blah blah blah, 8 seconds in your mind, and then you are somewhere else. I don't think it's really true. I think it depends on the quality of the content at the end, the quality of the stories. And we can see people, we're surrounded by people that are able to binge watch stuff on whatever Netflix or MX or any other platform. It means that they can focus on something, right? So it's all about, at the end, it's all about the content of the story and the narrative, more, I think, than anything else.
Sure. You did mention about brand equity, right? Getting built over a period of time too, with the content going out to your target audience, catering to their preferences. So then the topic also comes up as a news publisher or as a news body. Do you just state facts, or do you actually bring in a perspective, or you bring in a stance, which is it's a slightly tricky topic, but do you actually bring in a stance? And of course you do, to kind of be distinctive. But what is your take on it in terms of that adding or whatever, contributing not to the brand equity over a period of time?
Yeah, it's a very difficult question. We had multiple conversations over that with JB and all the team members, and we learn a lot by listening to the media that we work with and looking at what they were doing. But we're not an editorial platform. We're not journalists here, so we have to be. And I'm saying that because my brother is a journalist, so will not be happy with me saying like that's what you should do from a journalistic standpoint. But we observe trends and things. And I remember it was a very insightful conversation that I had with a very famous media person running a newspaper, and he explained to me something like, actually, in pretty much every newspaper, you have, let's call it that way, news section, which could be about economy, sports, politics, whatever, but you have an opinion section. And it has always been there. So it's pretty much the same than my cartoon example with video. Cartoons it has been in the press forever. The opinion column has been there forever. So I think there's no big problem having these two together, as long as it's clearly defined and well mentioned. And so you might have like something that is very fact driven. And we saw a lot of publishers utilizing very high quality and also high volume of content from Reuters, AP, AFP, et cetera, all these agencies. But in the meantime, you have like opinion-centric content. As long as it's mentioned clearly, I think it's perfectly fine. I remember that, I will mispronounce it, but there's a format like that on the Quint, which I think is Haine. I don't remember how to pronounce that, but it's like front camera, like 3 to 4 minutes, one topic pretty much every day. It's an opinion, but like you will find an opinion in a magazine or a newspaper. And I think it's perfectly fine. For me, there's no contradiction, as long as it's well explained, as long as there's like you're in one section, this is another section, this is an opinion, et cetera, et cetera. We saw that there's a Malaysian partner that we love, Malaysian Kini, which is a very strong news publication. Been there, very, very brave and very committed, and in a very complex environment. And they really have that split between news and feature. So news is news. It's like short format, 1 or 2 minutes, very fact driven, as much as we can tell. And feature is feature, longer, opinion oriented sometimes, or point of view on something, which is normal, by the way. So I don't think there's a big contradiction. I think it's manageable.
Yep. And probably somewhere does differentiate the publication, right, as a separate brand, because otherwise you would be another Me Too who is just stating facts. So you come up with
you're right.
Yeah. So
it's a good point. Sorry for the interruption. One formats that we saw a lot was the fact-checking formats, which is in the midst of these two. It was trending everywhere. It's an interesting format. By the way, it's core journalism also, so it's beautiful to see that flourishing again. I think it's a great format to follow, and it's something that goes very well in video at some point also.
Sure. So while we're at it, and we've covered some ground in terms of the various aspects of it, and I think one key call out also is the wonderful integration that has happened of Dailymotion into the Bold CMS. So we now the users of Bold CMS have access to all the interesting content which is on Dailymotion, and the wonderful technology that you have almost seamlessly, right? Not almost, actually seamlessly on Bold CMS.
As much as possible.
So it is a wonderful value add. The way I look at it, our publishers our clients are using it. Of course, likes of Quint, Bloomberg Quint, etc., and a bunch of others. That said, I would. It would be only relevant for you to also call out maybe the value proposition of Dailymotion the way you see it, right? Of course, embedded within the Bolt CMS portfolio and without as well. So also your thoughts on that for a brief, right?
But the context of Bolt CMS also makes sense for us in an overarching approach to that, because, okay, I'll take a step back to explain that, but I think video seems very simple, intuitive, and easy from a user perspective experience, because you go on a platform, you have video immediately from your phone, you record a video immediately. The entry barrier is getting lower and lower. That's from how you generate videos to how you publish videos. This is going close to zero in terms of the cost of doing things. But the behind the scene, the infrastructure and streaming all this video at scale, live and VOD and etc., is actually fairly complex still today. And the more it's growing, the more it costs, obviously. And why I'm sharing all of that is because actually it's already pretty difficult, as we talked about, to create your own content, your own format, your own tone of voice, etc., to produce that content is a big investment. So the way we look at ourselves, as well as what we've achieved, which is amazing, is like how we simplify and remove friction in the journey of a media or publisher that is trying to go deep into digital innovation or going into video, because it's already very challenging and tough to create these formats, to publish them and to be relevant with that. If on top of that you have a sort of a technology barrier, it's really painful. And so we approach our mission in a very simple way. We need to bring simplicity and no risk for any media and publisher that want to be strong into their video proposition as an OTT platform, as a publisher, as a media, whatever the terms that we use. But we want to be sure that when they decided to go with a strategy, so first, we're not here to dictate the strategy. We can give them insights, data, and so on. But then they decide to go in a strategy. It has to be as simple as possible. And we need to remove all the risks as much as we can of going into that video strategy. So simple is like user interface integration, for instance, with Bolt CMS is exactly that point. Like from a publication standpoint, I'm a journalist. I want to be able to bring my video in my article like that. It has to be seamless. And it goes along the way for the business model, for the way you monetize this video, and et cetera, et cetera. It has to, our mission is really like, we need to empower these media that are doing that bold move to go into the video segment, because it's difficult, crowded, and challenging. It's great, it's rewarding, but it's a long journey. You have to be consistent. And so we feel that the best way to do that for us from a product standpoint and from a company standpoint is very simple. Two things. One, we need to have pretty much the best product possible. And we do believe that we have close to the best product possible in terms of the way you can use it, in terms of the flexibility and versatility of the product. That's one. Great product. Okay, cool. But there's a lot of great product when you think about a video. And there's SaaS product in terms of video. They're cool, super cool. But the other fold that we care a lot about is the business model. Because if it costs you like 2 arms to just put a video up there, there's no long-term plan, because you already have this investment in terms of content creation. So the way we look at it is, let's bring it for free. Let's be sure that that full video solution is for free. And we've been doing that for the past 13 years or 14 years, actually. And we're able to do that, and we're committed to do that more and more and more as a long-term plan for us. And it's very important, because then you can really focus about what matters for a media or publisher, which is the content, the story, the message that you want to tell, the way you explain the world to your users, the way you engage with your users on your own platform. So we have designed or approached product in line with that mission, which is, it has to be super simple, the best product possible, and you don't need to take a risk by using a technology in terms of your business plan. You should not destroy your ambition in terms of video, because it costs you like a fortune to just have a platform. Should not be the case. Because if I am a YouTuber or a TikToker or an Instagram, I don't have that cost. I run on the platform, straightforward, and have zero cost. So if we want to compete with this kind of content, that's for us what should be the ecosystem. And so going back to your first mention, simplicity, high quality, the best product possible, that's what you bring with the Bolt CMS. It's very simple, very intuitive, the best product possible. You want it to be as intuitive as possible for the end users, and you want to simplify the journey as much as possible. We're in the same school of thought.
Yep. So it is, and hence it is such a wonderful thing that we are, Quintype and Dailymotion are now partners, and we are adding ever so much value to our clients, publishers across the board. In terms of adding value, again, we are in the world of metrics, data, and analytics, right? So, how do you actually, as a publisher, measure the value, right? I mean, how do you the value or not, for that matter? I mean, whether there is value or not, and if there is, how much value are you getting? How do you actually measure the performance of your videos? What are the metrics? How would you recommend that? What would you?
Gosh, there are so many things to say here, but maybe let me give you a very simple example. It's a little bit an oversimplification, but I think it will be telling for the audience. There's one metric that you should not consider that much, which is the one that is public everywhere. And there's a metric that is meaningful, which is the one that is not displayed when it comes to video. So the basic video metrics is video views. That's probably the most irrelevant metrics in my opinion, because video views, the way it's measured is pretty poor. And if you watch like 5 seconds or 5 minutes of the video, it's still 1 video views. So that metric for me is a weak signal. You can still consider it if you want, but it's a weak signal. It's full of traps. It has been gamified by many actors, which is not a good thing. So that metric, video views, I think for me is not super relevant. And the one that makes a lot of sense is the user engagement. So time spent on the video. Not exactly like you spend 25 minutes on the video, but how much of the video have you watched? Like half of it, 70% of it, 90% of it, etc., etc. That is a meaningful, for us, it's a meaningful metric, because it tells you how much your content is engaging your audience and in which ways. And what are the little elements that are not so engaging with that audience. And so you can correct some stuff. I just need to tell you that story because it was one of my favorite story when I started to work with media and organization. Sure. One of the pretty large, I think it was a radio at the time, one of the pretty large radio that we started working with. So by the way, radio turned into video, which was not obvious at that time. Now it's pretty much clear, but like, okay, so they start to put cameras in the studios, they film, they produce content, etc. And one of the best success they had, a lot of views. We were looking at the data with them. They were looking at views, we were looking at all the data, we talk together and we bring like, okay, that engagement metric is relevant. And then we realized that suddenly at the last 10% mark of the video, 80% of the audience was dropping, was just not anymore interested in the video at all. And so we're like, that's really bizarre. By the way, from a revenue standpoint, that's a shame because we can also put an advertising at the end, right? We can have pre-roll, post-roll, and mid-roll even, but like no post-roll there if everyone is dropping before the end. So we look at the way the video was constructed. And actually in the mindset of the radio, the credits about who participate in that videos and audio is critical. It's very important. You need to essentially credit absolutely everyone. And so the credit section at the end was super long. And we were like, oh, okay, so that's why they're dropping. Because the credits, I mean, it's relevant for a lot of people, but clearly not for your audience. The data can tell you. So eventually they managed to move the credits within the video. And then eventually they said, okay, credits, they might find it on the website. We don't need to put it, we don't need to have it into the video. And so that was a good example of like, if you look at the right metric, you will have the right insights. And these insights tells you something about the monetization capabilities that you have. Obviously, if you keep that 80–90% of your audience engaged till the end of the video, well, you can advertise them at the end. If they're dropping before, they're not there anymore.
That's very interesting, which actually brings to my mind that sometimes there are some videos which spend quite some time on, doing the drum beat or the introduction, right?
Yeah,
before actually getting to the point, right? So you have a message to be conveyed with the video, which is coming, let's say after 30 seconds, right? Yes. So half of the people are done and dusted and they've said, okay, thanks. So
it's very true. It's a very good point.
So I think that is very relevant. So as we are speaking, there are a couple of questions which have cropped up. So we can, maybe I'll present it to you, Antoine, for your thoughts. So it's more around Dailymotion analytics. Is it all pre-built, or is there something that can be done on a case-to-case basis by users? Can they do something self-service, or how does this analytics piece work in a little more detail?
Sure.
For a wider audience here.
It's a great point, because it's actually going back to my point about like simplicity versus not simplicity. So both, actually. We have a very simple, right off the shelf, immediate usability of a bunch of metrics that are available to anyone without any need to be tech savvy. Actually, it's very simple. That's strong enough to understand more or less the user engagement and user journey and how the video are performing. But it's defined by us, right? Again, back to my first point. So that is available right away. On top of that, we have obviously integration with other third-party measurement companies that are very important in the industry. Might be Comscore, might be Reuters, my God, Nielsen, might be Google Analytics, or DMPs that we can integrate with via API. I should not be too technical because JB is here and is the expert, I'm not. But anyway, at some point, and actually more and more these days because of what JB's mentioned about the cookieless world, which I can explain later if needed, though it's very complex and dry. But you have to build cohort, persona, segment, user type of, et cetera, and actually via the API, you can retrieve a lot of information about that context that helps you to create categories or analytics that are not here by default in our own analytics space on dailymotion.com, right? So we really go from, it's very simple. Very simple, it's here, you click on a button, you have all your advertising in one place. Okay, that's the frictionless way. Then you want to go a little bit deeper, you integrate with all the third parties that we're already pre-integrated with. And then you want to build your own stuff. And so we expose everything into an API as publicly as possible. I mean, as deeply as possible. Publicly is not the right term because it's not public, it's actually addressable for the given media. And then you can build your own cohort and your own very granular approach. And it goes pretty much the same in each direction, meaning like you can look at that from audience, geography, time spent on the video, type of OS, these kind of things will tell you a lot. Obviously, in the advertising business, you will see that the price is different if you are on an Apple phone versus an Oppo phone versus a Vivo phone versus a Samsung phone, et cetera, which is true. So having that and that granularity will also bring value at the end of the journey when you talk to a brand, a client, or an agency.
Sure. Another interesting question around SEO, which is actually one of my favorite topics. So around SEO and discoverability, right? So here goes the thought that the question, of course, is that videos mean enhanced discoverability. So how does Dailymotion do the SEO part of it? How do you, let's say, compare with your competitors? Obvious reference, I guess. So,
so Demby will kill me because it's recorded, but I can say it because our main competitor, in a way, has been for a few years at least YouTube, which we admire from the beginning to the end. It's also under I mean, it's a Google company. So when it comes to SEO and video, and you have YouTube, and it's a Google company, you're like, wow, that's a difficult space to be. So the way I will address it's obviously a very important question. It's a very, very important question because still for most of our partners, that discoverability piece through SEO is dominant in the way they build new audience, or even in the way they stabilize their audience. I will tell you something that I should not, but I will tell you the way we address that. We address that by trying to put ourselves not in the first position everywhere, which is very weird for most of from a company standpoint. In other words, and again, nothing negative, I just have pure admiration for YouTube and Google, like nothing bad. But like if you search for a video that is only on YouTube or predominantly on YouTube, well, without any surprise, the first link will be YouTube, which is normal. If you search for a video that is on Dailymotion, as well as, let's say, on the Quint, which is, by the way, a use case, the first link will be the Quint. If you look for the same video of the Quint and on YouTube, the first link will be YouTube. In other words, we try to be here in the first page when it comes to SEO, but not the first one. Why? Is because the video content has been first published on, let's say, the Quint. So the #1 source and the authority from the source is coming from the Quint, not from Dailymotion, and in my opinion, not from YouTube, right? Personal opinion here. So if you, and you can do that exercise. I did that exercise yesterday with the Quint. I did that exercise every year with a lot of the publishers that we work with, which is you take a video, you search for it. What is the #1 link? Where is that coming from? And so in a way, it's us being realistic with what is the market, because we don't control the SEO, and it's easy and difficult to gamify it and to try to play with it, and it's risky and it's a very complex business. But the core value, the core principle over our head is that if that story was originally published on the Quint as a video, that should be the #1 link, because the authority is coming from there, authority in terms of SEO. And then you might have an SMO layer on top of it, but it's advertising, it's marketing activation. That's different.
That's an amazing point. I think that really resonates. I personally love that. That's a great perspective. I mean, you are just doing the right attribution, right? I mean, it's perfect. So yeah, it's really nice. So on that note, sorry, you were about to say something?
No, I should not say that. I should also say that it's not like we had the choice in a way, because you're in front of Google. So you don't compete in front of Google, like head to head would make no sense. So for us to have an aligned mission and vision with the partners that we cherish, and they are media and publisher, we need to serve them also.
Sure. No, fair point. So, as we are reaching the end of the hour, do you have any, any thoughts in summary, or any, any extracts from your experience? Maybe any success stories that Dailymotion had. Maybe you, JB, or Danby, or whoever wants to, just pitch in and call out anything additional to what we discussed, or relevant to what we discussed from experiences. We still have a few minutes to go, so if you want,
we did one thing also, thanks to Denby for the lazy people like me, which is like kind of the summary of what we have mentioned, which is always super useful, because in each of the conferences and talk and kind of this conversation, you might be like distracted by something else. You have all this notification, etc. So Denby put together some sort of like a digest, which I think is very, very helpful. Yeah, so it's right here on the screen in case you want to have. We'll share it also. I think one overarching element that we want to underline again and again and again is that the ecosystem, well, digital ecosystem, you know that better than me, video ecosystem also, is constantly changing. So nothing is like forever in terms of the way you approach that. So you have, I think that agile mentality when it comes to video is important. When it comes to you go to platforms, and being true and honest with your brand equity, brand gravitas when you're on your own platform, you're on your own OTT app, on your own destination website, on your own website. I think these two things are different, but equally meaningful. And we've been lucky to observe that firsthand from a lot of publishers, because it's not an easy business, honestly. It's not that simple. So a lot of them have been very, very bold in trying new things and learning from that and adjusting from that.
Sure. Thanks, Danby, for putting this together. I mean, it's actually a lot of insights in one view, and I love the imagery, by the way. So it's very it's very impactful. So I think we've reached the end of the hour. If requesting the audience, if you have any questions, please feel free and put it in the chat box. Feel free to go ahead and put it in the chat box.
I've tried to put a few links also in the chat box in case it's interesting for anyone. One is I don't know if it's visible, but I think, oh no, it's probably only to panelists. Let me check that. Okay, let me do it again. But these are good stories, I think, to consider, and there's food for thoughts. Let me put it here, just for everyone to know. The first one is Ben Evans, which is a former VC and very smart person, obviously, who will go deep into like the shift in advertising and which media has been impacted by that shift in advertising. And no surprise here. The other one is more like a recent story about the evolution of formats and lengths of video, comparing TikTok and YouTube. Very interesting, going in opposite direction, in a very in a very funny way to observe. So that tells you that, yeah, it keeps changing. Oh, thanks, JP.
Oh, very useful links and thoughts, Antoine. So I believe there are no further questions, and we've also reached the top of the hour. I would take this opportunity once again to firstly thank all the people who joined us for this session. And Antoine, JB, Danby, thank you so much for your valuable time this evening to kind of discuss on these interesting topics. We'd be, for the audience, we'd be sending out the recorded video of this, and we are open to any follow-up questions you might have now or later after viewing the video, or after